Forza.js.
So, hello, I'm Mateusz and I'm a web and mobile developer working on the development of web and mobile applications since 2008, and I also run my own company, AppIdea.pl. It's a one-man orchestra, so entire company is here. And I would like to today to tell you a few words about React Native, how it's to code this kind of applications. And please raise your hand if you didn't hear anything about React.js or React Native, let's say, yeah. Okay, so I will maybe briefly explain that React Native is a library for creating web applications mobile applications in a reactive way using JavaScript and React.js. And it's not another hybrid application engine because it's not engaging WebView as a core component. It just straightly manipulates the elements in native views on the platforms, on the instance of the application on platforms iOS and Android. In React Native, the JavaScript is executed in embedded JavaScript engine and manipulates the view. And now I will tell you why do I love it. Because with React Native, you can rocket fastly write the native cross-platform apps, and the logic regarding the view is kept always on one place. You can still utilize the best React features like hook state, props. Everything on this React layer works as in traditional React web application. And it's possible to share the business logic between web and mobile without any adapters because you're managing it really similar way in some scope. Which scope I will show you later. And the concept here is to have similar API about, for example, styling to the web. So if you were a web developer before, you will find sometimes the right solution just using your intuition. So I think it's really worth to code there. And yeah, my presentation actually has the title "Build Your Second React Native App," but just for reference, I will fastly let's fastly go through the basic and the first, your first React app, React Native app. So you can use the React Native package to init the React Native application, and it will create more or less the project that you can see on the screenshot. I modified it a little bit because I wanted to point out what is the most important here. So it's important to see that there is not just JavaScript code. There are also directories for Android and iOS that contain some native code. So let's write our first React Native application. So what is the first one? Coffee time. Okay, let's take some coffee. After that, let's open the IDE. Okay, let's create the project. No, I don't want to update it today. Remind me tomorrow about that. Okay, CPU goes to 900% because the IDE just indexing our project. Did you see that cut? Okay. Yeah, so we are set and writing our app. Yeah, we got it. So we have something like that, and it's basic React Native application. We can consider something like that. This is a single React component, and we can tell that it's a really basic application that shows some image and text. And yeah, let's maybe go through the most important components in React Native. The view component is something like equivalent to the divider on the web. this is the basic box that actually we can position, we can put into the Flexbox flow. Yeah, the most important thing is that React Native operates like position the elements using the Flexbox manner. So it's something that you know from the web. And important thing is that not everything in React Native can be a box. In the web, you basically can transform any element into the box. Here it's not possible. The components of React Native have are grouped in the classes, and only some of them have this ability to be a box. For example, image view, touchable opacity, and so on. Text component is it's the actually the component that keeps any textual content. You cannot put into the React Native application the textual content as it is, as in web applications, that you can just write some text anywhere and it will render. No, here we have something that it's, let's say, similar to internal text node on the web, because every text that you are putting on the website is internally treated as a text node. And texts can nest other texts, for example, to build some formatted texts. And we have the image component here that it's responsible for handling the images. In React Native, we have two components that can keep images. It's image and image background, as I remember correctly. And the image is just for embedding any image. Image background is a view that has an image background. It's something like divider on the web, but with image background. Okay, so let's try to add an interactive feature to our application. It will be this traditional incrementing feature. And yeah, we can see that to our basic application code we added two sections that are the section with state handling and the section that handled the displaying of the counter and button. So this way we created our first interactive application in React.js. The debug feature is something that makes work with React Native application more easy. When you shake your device, which runs your React Native application, you can enable React developer, not React, but Chrome developer tools that will let you, for example, see the console logs that you are writing, that you are emitting from your application. It's a nice feature, but has some limitations about that later on. Okay, so congrats, we have our first quite interactive application ready. But why I did name my presentation like build your second React Native application? Because there is already a lot of the guides in the internet how to build your first React Native application, and even now you've seen a moment before this kind of the guide. But the real this kind of guides can give you a wrong impression that React Native development does not differ a lot from web programming. It does, and it does differ really much. So there are similarities, but it's different. And building and maintenance of your second mobile application, so the full-featured one, will unveil you the real issues that sits in React Native development. And I would like to present some of ones from my experience. Okay, so assuming that we have our first application ready, let's consider what are the key functionalities of the mobile app. So it's a routing machine. We have to route between the screens. We have to implement some push notifications. and possibly entire communication module. It's what clients love, so faster or later you will be asked for that. And strategies of storing the data on the offline usage. Of course, everything, as I mentioned, is also possible to implement in web application, but we not always doing that. But in mobile application, it's something that is crucial. Okay, and let's assume we are regular web developers. They promised us that we will be building React native application just in JavaScript. So let's set up some routine. And after making some updates to your resume, because you became now in this few minutes mobile developer, you refill the cup of coffee, going back to development of your brand new mobile app. And okay, let's Google for some navigation library. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3 available. There is a React Navigation, React Router Native, React Native Navigation by Wix, and etc., etc. So, okay, which to choose? But as we are quite green, developers of React Native, we just toss the coin. And okay, let's select this React Navigation. And after reading some instructions how to set up the application, we see something like that. Some pods, some Java editing. Come on. What is it? Okay, let's do it later. About the push notifications. Okay, so if you want to implement some push notifications that will be working continuously in the background, even if your application is not up, you probably will land with integrating some Firebase, React Native Firebase, let's say, which will integrate the push notifications. But again, they also requiring to go to the native code and change something. Oh no, they promised it will be writing the native apps JavaScript, and it's first surprise. Don't believe it. You will later or earlier you will land inside the native code and you will have to change something there. Okay, so don't believe them if they talking like that. Okay, just to sum up, of course you can be the developer which wants to extend yourself and you want to learn, for example, Java. But if you are going to create a production app, be sure that you know more or less the architecture that you're targeting. So if you are doing application for iOS, just briefly go through the architecture of your target system. If you are going to do it on Android, also check how the mobile application on Android works and what are the most often what are the problems related to that in React Native. Possible workaround around that is to use Expo. Of course, it adds some abstraction level that will let you escape from the native code, but you have to remember that it also adds some complexity. So you probably will need some help if the library that you want to use doesn't have Expo bindings. I had one case like that in my library recently, and if you just don't know how to do that, you are dependent on something that will write the extension to use the Expo. And about the React Native itself, in the server conditions, it's still unstable because it has 0 on the beginning. So yeah, it's a library that has some that it's not fresh, but some issues happening from time to time. For example, when there was a migration from 0.59 to 0.16, there was problem with Android X. And what happened?
Of course, a lot of the libraries authors were required to migrate their libraries to Android X. So if you wanted just to bump your version of your React Native, you will have to take care about migrating to Android X. There was some, to be honest, the Jetifier which were helping that, but in the end, a lot of the libraries needed some manual migration. And what is also surprising for someone, the React Native has totally different runtime. When, of course, there is a table with comparison of the runtimes of the bundlers. Everything is, of course, elastic. We can switch to rollup, for example, about the bundler in the web. But by default, React Native works on Metro Bundler, runs on JSC. Sorry, CJS is wrong here. Or Hermes, and renders not to the DOM, but to the native view. What is the surprise? Because some people still considering the views in React Native as they would render it to the browser. It's not true. There is no web view. The styling can a little bit remind the CSS. It's realized using the style property, and although it looks like a CSS in JS, it's not totally a CSS. It's not a CSS at all. It's just a group of the properties that names are intended to remind the CSS, but it's not CSS. And style properties are not inherited by the children. Positioning of the images is implemented a little bit different way than in the browser. They had to rewrite it from the scratch to tackle this problem of cross-platform functionalities, and is realized by the special resize method and resize mode. So be aware of that. And there are some known issues about scaling the images on the production. So you will for sure also meet that problem. And what is the worst thing? It's appearing just on the production. So if you, for example, run your application in debug mode, you can even not see that problem. And you will see that only when your app will go to the production. Yeah, so be aware of that and follow them. Yeah, what is the really easy in web applications? In React Native, it's not so easy. It's the using, for example, the custom fonts. It's not just a drop-in solution like for example with Google Fonts that you are throwing the some embed script and you have it. You have to place them in the native application first and also take care about the naming, about the metadata inside. So it's the issue that will met you. Of course, there is a lot of the guides on the internet how to tackle that. But it's not working out of the box, as well as SVG support. You have to install some library to tackle that. Rich text support is also some problematic stuff. There is no HTML, so you will not be able to just drop in the formatted text. You have to also use some library to display the rich text. For example, this rich text React renderer or Markdown. So plan it in advance if you want to have the kind of feature in React Native. React Native universe is quite big. There is a Metro Bundler, as I said before. It does not use the Webpack, the React Native by default. You can always escape into the Webpack with the CallStack's powerful repack package. They promised me that it works. I didn't test it, but yeah, the Metro has some limitations. For example, following the symlinks. So if you, for example, plan the Lerna feature in your application, be aware, because Metro has some issues about that. It's possible, but it's not so easy. JavaScript core is another happy thing in React Native. So if you used to write your JavaScript applications, having in mind that you are writing it to the V8 and Chrome, it's not the same. JavaScript core is something that was that is known from Apple products like Safari and so on. So this is not implementing entirely all the new functionalities of future JavaScript. So be sure that you will configure the bubble good enough to handle the constructs, or you polyfilling it. And the funny thing is what happens when you are running the application in this beautiful debug mode. Because by default, when the application is in the production mode, it uses this JavaScript core. But when you are enabling that debug mode, it takes the runtime from host machine, from host Chrome instance that is displaying this developer tools. So actually, in that case, your application running in V8 when you are in debug, and when you are switching back to the production, it uses totally other runtime. And it's surprise number 5. There is a Hermes on the way. It's a maybe better runtime. Let's see. It's still under the development. You can opt in for that, changing your native code in React Native. And it's open source JavaScript engine optimized to tackle this React Native applications. So it's something that it's a future of React Native. Maybe it will be better runtime. And it allows you to omit that problem with debugging, because you are binding there some other way. You are still debugging on the Hermes if you are debugging actually. Remember that libraries are powerful. React Native has a strong community of and brings thousands of the libraries. And remember that it's something characteristic for React Native packages, that they are not containing just JavaScript, but also the native code. So in NPM package, you have not only JavaScript, also the Android and so on. So be aware of that, and you have to link the libraries always when you are when you are installing the new. And React Native has something like auto-linking that should work, but you will often also end up with Cocoa Pods. What is Cocoa Pods? It's a package manager for React for iOS applications. So it's very likely that you will have to manipulate their by hand, because auto-linking not always work, or someone requires some application requires you to do it manually for some reason. Please remember that it's open source, so not always everything is delivered. Okay, so it's really brief, and I think really a heavy presentation of the features of React Native that you have to be aware of. To sum up, it's a powerful tool, but if you are going to write the application, remember that it's also the complex tool. It's not always about writing just the JavaScript, and yeah, keep in mind that it's complex. But enjoy. It's really powerful tool, and I really appreciate it, and it helped me a lot, and I really like it, and don't plan to leave that library. So enjoy, and thank you for listening. You can always follow me on GitHub. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye.
I forgot to mention, Mateusz, thank you very much. Nice job, and also in time. We love that. We have a 5-minute period between speakers. If anyone has any questions for Mateusz, this is a good time to ask. I will come to you with the microphone. Okay, of course, on the very end, here we come.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I have two questions actually. The first one, you mentioned that we have a couple of packages to add routing and rich text editor to our app. Are all of them maintained by community, or there is a desired package maintained by Facebook developers?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff is maintained by open source, so actually they are opened. There is a group of the packages on NPM that has a prefix React Native community. They were previously the part of the React Native, but they were moved to the open source maintenance. So part of them are there is a group of these packages, but those that are responsible for rendering are not a part of Facebook's work. I can say.
Okay, thank you. And goes for the second question. How do we test React Native code? Is it just compatible with it?
Seems so. So, yeah, React testing library. As you can see, the React Native code is still React. So you can use the same tools that you are using for testing your web applications, but you have to, of course, take care of the mocking adequately.
Okay, I guess those were good questions. Any other questions, anybody on this side? One question, please, per person. That would be great. This Cocoa Pods made me feel very hungry. I don't know about anybody else. What is this Cocoa Pods? Anyway, any other questions? Anyone from Mateusz? Okay, well, thank you very much. I guess you've explained everything very well. We appreciate you very much.
It was my first fully featured presentation on the meetup. So
good job. Thank you very much. We thank you. Are you sure? No more questions from Mateusz?